show you pieces of it so that you have, somebody just joined us. Is that John?
That's Harris from Greenton.
That's Harris.
Okay, sorry. So what we'll have is, as we go through the process, is we're going to take you through pieces of it with the understanding that at the very end, you'll see a completed piece of work that lists an acquisition funnel for each of the segments. But what we wanted to do early on is make sure that you had an understanding of these markets and at the same time feed you with realistic acquisition targets so that we can start moving the process forward. As we discussed early on, it takes some time for outreach. And so I think Steve had pointed out earlier, the sooner we get started with the outreach process, the better off we are in terms of timing. So again, this is a iterative process, and what we're trying to do is go piece by piece. So I'm going to today walk you through the pieces that we've already seen, but not quite all of it. So where we last left off was the market overview, and that was the water and wastewater treatment market. And we talked about on-site municipal trends, and I listed on this page here, 17, just a list of cities and regulations. So you have an understanding of what the cities are doing in terms of regulation around on-site water reuse. That was really the last piece you had not seen. You can look at it later on, but it was really kind of the last piece of the overall market overview. The important piece today, and I think we're all waiting for, is really understanding the water and wastewater treatment acquisition screening process. So we began the process on the wastewater the water and wastewater side with an initial screen of over 30 companies. And the companies were screened for right markets, the products, the relevant size. There are a number of companies that are below $10 million in revenues. So our goal was really to focus on the companies that were closer to the $20 to $50 million in range in revenues that could be an acquisition size of $100 million plus. Then what we did is we screened for capabilities, and we also screened for channel strength. So we have a list of manufacturer reps and distributors, and we cross-reference those with the companies to better understand how they were positioned in the marketplace. And then from there, we created a list of names from which to work. And that list you'll be able to review, and we'll tighten up that list with your input to see which companies we either move forward with or those companies we leave behind for later. So what you have on page 24 in front of us is a list of companies ranked by size. So what I'll do is I'll briefly go through the names of the companies, and then what I'll walk you through is how we position those companies based on the decision matrix. So you have a better understanding of the rankings. The decision matrix we're using is a heat map. So red will be the most attractive, hot, and blue is cold, and yellow is somewhat neutral. So starting with the companies here, you can see we have companies that start like Premier Tech Aqua that started $168.5 million in revenues. And let me preface this, these are estimated revenues. Many of these companies are private. So what we're able to capture is through a number of different references that we use and sources that we use based on number of employees, as well as some reported figures, estimated revenues. So unless these are publicly traded companies or unless I state otherwise, these are approximate valuations. And so the idea for a Premier Tech Aqua is this is a fairly large company. This is the largest in the group. It's a Canadian subsidiary of parent Premier Tech. They offer a whole host of on-site water treatment solutions, including septic tanks, MBRs, SBRs, and packaged solutions, both precast concrete and polyethylene. I'm not going to go into detail at this point. I'm just going to walk you through each of these names briefly, and then we'll show you some tear sheets. And then after our presentation today, you can decide if you want to dig deeper on any of these names or initiate an outreach. So the second largest in the category is H2O Innovation. They're a publicly traded Canadian company. They participate in municipal water as well as commercial and to a very limited extent residential. So they're not as much in the sweet spot in terms of the markets that they serve, but they have a strong recurring set of revenue, which is about 45% of the revenue. The next one is Nuterra. Nuterra is a packaged and modular water treatment solutions company. They do have their own filtration and aeration systems, so they do offer some technology. They are currently in the market. I think we can say, without breaching any confidentiality, GWI has said that they are in the market. We know that's to be the case. They are, again, a little bit more heavy on industrial and some residential, but it's usually residential communities. Great systems, great packages. It may not be the perfect fit for you, but it's a good-sized company. The next one's Aranco. You may know Aranco. They do offer similar products, probably the closest company in terms of product offering, but they do have a move toward on-site water treatment. They've positioned themselves quite well. They were founded in 1981. This is a family company based out of Oregon. Great distribution, a lot of strong representation among manufacturers' reps. The question here will be, are they willing to sell? I do have a call with a company, just as a general matter. Again, all the outreach I have or the discussions I have are on an anonymous basis. So I have a call with the COO of the company next week, who I've known for quite some time. So I'll be able to provide some feedback on what they're thinking, timing, and openness to potential transactions. Many of these companies today may not have been willing to sell 6 months or a year ago, but as a result of COVID, you might find some things have changed with some of these companies. The next company we have is Natural Systems Utilities. This, by far, I think, in my view, is probably the most attractive of all of these. Duncan knows the company quite well. He has worked with the company historically. I know the company quite well through XPV. XPV is the principal shareholder of the company. There was a change in management due to the passing of the founder. A tragic accident happened in 2016, and the family may be up for selling the business sometime soon. This really participates in on-site water treatment and reuse. Great product offering, mostly a design, developer, and operator, so a lot of recurring revenues. Probably, what we estimate is a $25 to $30 million business. They have an acquisition pipeline, and the acquisition pipeline could easily double the amount of revenues. The next one is Norwalk Wastewater Equipment, or Norweco. About a similar size company, but this is an equipment manufacturer. They're based in Ohio. Company has a solid reputation among manufacturer reps. They've done a good job in terms of differentiating their products. They could also be a good fit. This is a family-run business. We do not know the family. I don't know the family. Perhaps Nomura Greentech have come across them in the past, but we'll be able to discuss this later on. Then you work down from here to the smaller companies. We eliminated a lot of companies that were smaller, some that have some good technologies. Axion is a systems integrator. They do a great job in RO membrane housings. They have done a great job in terms of coming up with diversifying their offerings to pure water, so a lot of industrial water. That's the only drawback, is it's really not close to home on the residential side. They do a lot of commercial work. Could they do work in residential? Possibly. Could they take you toward some of the desalination work that you'd be interested in? Possibly. Not a high priority, but we keep them on the list. Food Systems, they do work similar to what Rotoplas does. A lot of on-site water treatment systems. Many of these have to be permitted throughout the United States. They've been permitted through a number of states. Very strong in the southeast of the United States. They have a varied offering. Revenue size is not ideal. It's a little bit below what we'd like, but we keep them on the list because they are sizable and they do have a good market presence. The next one is Biomicrobics. This is an interesting company. They were much larger at one time. They appear to be much larger than they really are. Internally at Thales, we've come across them a lot. Raphael and I have discussed this quite a bit. They have a a strong reputation. I did a lot of work talking to engineering consulting firms that specialize in on-site reuse, and they've mentioned them a lot. They have thousands of installations over time. Generally, they're one-off sales, so the revenue base going back to 1996 means they have a lot of installations. They could become could be a great opportunity for service, but today they don't have as much service. This is a company that has a link with Smith & Lovelace. It's an interesting link. So they may be willing to sell this business at some point in time. And I think the founder of the company is much older, and his son is running the Smith & Lovelace business. So the question is how the two fit together, and would they be willing to sell, and what the growth outlook is, but they have a very unique product. Next is another smaller company called Elgin. They specialize in septic and drainage in-bed non-mechanical wastewater treatment, as well as dispersal technology. So what does this mean? They also have on-site water treatment systems as well as some of the drainage systems. So it could be a great tuck-in acquisition for Rotoplas, good product offering, good manufacturing reps, but it's on the small side. And then the next two are smaller companies. I don't want to go into them now, but they could be tuck-in acquisitions later on. Again, most of these companies have been filtered based on the product offering, if it's differentiated, as well as if they have a good presence, channel distribution through manufacturing reps or their own independent distributors. So this is kind of a high level of where everybody is. So on the left side, I take you to markets that you really aren't your preferred markets based on our discussions. The right side are the companies that are really playing closer to home. Again, the vertical axis or the y-axis really is about size. This is not to scale once you get below 20 million. So the companies that are of the most interest, I think the most attractive, are Norweco, Aranco, Natural Systems Utilities. I think Premier Tech would be a stretch, but it depends on what they can sell. They may be able to sell some assets, or they may be interested in selling some assets, and it's worth approaching. The other companies, I think they offer some great technologies. It might be a step out from your core business, and that's something that we can discuss, and that would be H2O Innovation as well as Nuterra. So the exercise here, again, was really trying to find everything that aligned between size, core markets, and offering. Again, the three names that stood out for us. And again, I repeat, this is just water and wastewater treatment. We have a whole host of names that are outside of this group. So the acquisition funnel will continue to build. So the items to note as we show you the weighting of the decision matrix are the weightings for each category reflect criteria scores provided by the Rotoplas team. What we did is we took those scores and we created an average score per category, summed up all the points to come up with a total score. We excluded certain financial metrics just to keep everybody on an even playing field, and those are metrics such as margins, IRR, given the lack of information at this time. So we don't know, for the non-publicly traded companies, you generally don't know the margins. We have an idea based on the type of businesses they operate. We can evaluate that as we get closer. If we do have an outreach with those companies, we could probably get some margin parameters, and then we can refine the decision matrix. And then again, the last one is Premier Tech Aqua. What we did here is we applied negative values given the size and the potential risk to the acquisition. So generally, you're giving more points for scale of a company. In this case, because it was outside of the barriers that we set up on the high end, we applied a negative score to it, just so it fits more closely with our objectives.
So, David, yeah. Just before moving forward, is any of these companies successful at leasing their equipments, or they just sell out the products, do the installation, and collect their money?
So we can go by each one of these companies. So some of them have a leasing model. For example, Nuterra has a leasing model. H2O Innovations has an operating model. So they both lease and operate the assets. So they'll sell the assets and then operate the assets. as you get to the smaller companies, Newterra, by the way, the leasing model has just started, so it's 10 to 15% of their business. Most of these companies that we're finding at these revenue levels do not lease their products. Most of them are one-time sales. Natural Systems Utilities, on the other hand, sells, designs, engineers, and then sells and then operates the product. So design, build, and then operates. And that's probably the one with the most, with the highest recurring revenue stream.
So I think it would be very interesting to try to characterize those leasing models, like to have a very good understanding of what are they doing and why they are leasing their products.
Again, I think that's great. Again, there really aren't, other than ones I mentioned, there's not a lot of leasing activity. So you have Newterra, which has just started to lease their products, and that's an $80 million business that just started. And then Natural Systems Utilities tends to sell and then operate the system. There may be some leasing revenues behind that I could look, but most of these do not lease their business, their products, just because they don't have a balance sheet to do it.
Yeah, but I understand, but just if we can understand or characterize what is that Newterra is doing and how is it that he's going out into the market, and what's the whole model how it's laid out and planned. I think that could be very interesting for us.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's something we
David, could I just jump in to address Mario's question? Have you been involved with the Newterra process? Because this business has been marketed pretty hard, in a banker-led process over the last 9 months.
Yeah, I have to be careful. So I have looked at the business from a buyer's perspective. And
my question was to Mario, David, just to understand whether they'd actually...
The business was approached to us in January this year.
Yeah.
But we decided not to pursue it going forward.
Yeah, so what I can say about the business, so who was marketing the business. We have, H2O Insights has a relationship with Capstone Headwaters. That relationship on this side, we did not work with them on the sell side of the transaction. So we had worked with buyers on the transaction. So I cannot say from Capstone's perspective officially where that business is, other than the fact that other processes have slowed down based on the difficulty of getting to Canada. So you can assume that may be the case with this one. It could be on hold. We could follow up with Capstone Headwaters officially very easily and get an answer. But if you've already passed on that business, I'm assuming there's no interest in the business, or was it based on valuation?
It was based at, first we want to have clarity on what are the markets that we want to focus into the U.S. before just jumping at the first opportunity that was presented to us.
Sure.
So that is why we're doing this with you guys.
Yep.
So just about can I say one other thing, David?
Sure.
So just just on Newterra, and I think this probably applies across the sector. So there's the whole kind of balance sheet kind of restrictions on the vendor, but certainly from anecdotal conversations with the CEO of Newterra, that part of the reason they have been slow to build a leasing model is a lot of their customer base don't want to lease. They like the full capital model. So I think the first point that their balance sheet, the vendor balance sheet constraints probably predominates. But it's quite interesting how across the sector, including on the industrial side, people seem to be reluctant to go down the lease model. So anyway, I just as due diligence, that's an interesting data point. And I would also say outside that process, it would be easy to tee up a conversation with the CEO of Newterra for you just to have that conversation if it was helpful.
Yeah, I could probably do an outreach to Tom. That's not a problem. I think we can do that. And the other point that Duncan has made is a good point. It also depends on the market. So if you are going to the municipal side, which they do have a municipal portion of their business, but a large part of their business, a vast majority of it's industrial. It depends where you go. So if it's out of the operating budget, at least becomes more attractive. If it's out of the capital budget, it depends on the type of business. So sometimes the capital budget, you'll find there are plenty of resources by the buyer of the equipment, they don't need it. So it's on a case-by-case basis and sector-by-sector basis. But we can follow up, certainly with the larger ones. Rafael, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we sort of hypothesized this in the beginning, and I think all the work has sort of borne it out, that, in terms of finding a company which is sizable, with predominantly a leasing model, and especially more in terms of that commercial institutional level, there's just not going to be one that's going to meet all three of those criteria. If you want at least one of them is going to have to be loosened up in terms of, there's, when you look at the industrial municipal, there's more leasing stuff, but even then to find one with 50 million is difficult. There are smaller ones that you can find that are more focused, that are more lease focused. There are lots of companies, most companies like Nutera, they start out as equipment sales, they finally get big enough, they start to toy with leasing. They can only go so far because of their balance sheet. So they end up, with 80% equipment, 10, 15, 20% leases. So you start to see a bunch of those at some of the sizable levels. But of course, Nutera is very, industrial and municipal focused, both on their equipment and on their leases.
Where we have seen leasing, Rafael, if I'm not mistaken, is when you start to look at some of the large projects or large capital equipment. For example, in dewatering, we spent a lot of time in dewatering not too long ago on a particular project, and a lot of the dewatering was rental or long-term leases. Yeah. Because you're working on a project where the equipment is it's a large purchase price, and that's the trade-off, and it's fixed for a long period of time. But when you tend to go down in size of the product, so your $1,000 product, it's less likely to lease versus a $200,000 product. Does that help a little bit? And we'll work on this a little bit more for you specifically around maybe a Nutera or a couple other names, Mario. But I hope that provides a little bit of color just at a high level.
Yeah, that's fine. And the reason I'm asking is because for us it's important to understand what are the drivers of the business, and obviously going into a lease model, the financial model behaves totally different.
Yeah, and we have a lot of experience with, both Rafael and I do, in terms of dealing with companies that do have a leasing model. And again, it tends to be the large purchases. And what we're looking at here, there aren't a lot of companies that'll pop up on the leasing side. However, you will see the notion of contract management more attractive. And that's where you have a natural systems utility that I think really stands out, because that's one of them that really has all the products together. So this is the decision matrix grid. Again, it's a heat map. Sometimes you'll see a blue, you'll see a green, yellow, red, green for go. In this particular case, it's a heat map. Red being the most attractive by each of the categories. This might be a little bit cluttered at first glance, and I'll walk you through it. So we went through each of the criteria that you laid out, and we can share a copy with you again on the weightings for each of these. But essentially, we took a raw score for each company and then multiplied it by the weighting that you folks had provided us. And then each of the categories had their own summary score, total score for value, financial services, and risk, for example. And then if you look down at the very bottom, you get the total score down at this very bottom here. So what you end up with is companies that are, I don't know if this is easier to see or not, but you come up with the companies that have the higher scores here, such as an NSU or an Nutera, a Norweco, and a Renco come up as sort of higher quality scores then you have a Premier Tech Aqua, might be a more difficult type of acquisition, but based on the criteria and the point system that we use, it popped up very high. And then we have the last of the four here that we called out earlier is Microbix, Biomicrobix, which is orange on its way to red. So again, this is a preliminary scorecard. We'll send you the Excel spreadsheet, and you can tweak it based on the discussions we have with each of these companies going forward, or as we dig deeper on these. From here, what we try to do, I'm going to pause. Do you have any questions on the sheet, how it's laid out, or you can follow up later on? I know there's a lot of data to look at.
David, just a doubt. We have 15 criteria, and I understand here we have 13 because you don't have the additional information in regards the two missing financial criteria, right?
Right. So we're excluding. Correct. I actually I hid the cells.
Yes, and the other one, did you assign a normalized weight to each criteria? Meant by you divided 100 by those 15?
Yeah, so
okay.
Each criteria had a point system and then divided by the total criteria, by the total points. So each one totals up to the final score down below. So we take each of the categories, all the categories sum up to the very end. So based on the way you laid it out earlier, we didn't do the 1 through 4 as I understood it. We did the point system. I think you had 32 points
right.
for each of these. And
okay.
That's how we laid it out.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. And again, this is, I think, for purposes here, more directional, and that's why we put preliminary here, because I think there'll be some fine-tuning as we get some acquisition criteria or some of the financial characteristics pulled out. For example, if you're talking about a Nutera, I don't know if you've seen the SIM or the executive summary. H2O Innovations is publicly traded, but the others are not. So we don't have an apples to apples for the rest. We maybe will get an idea for a handful. So what happens is you penalize the companies that don't have or that may have information, and the ones that don't have any information, they're all zeros. So for now, we've left everybody as a zero. That helps. That's as it relates to margins and IRR.
Just a question. I don't know if you're familiar with a company that's called Fluence.
Yep.
I'm very familiar.
Yep, we're all familiar with them.
I would assume that is there a reason that you are not looking at Fluence as a company to include in the?
They're very strong internationally, South America, Africa, Israel, but less so in the United States.
They have very little presence in the U.S. The margin profile is pretty bad.
Right.
Revenues have just collapsed this last period. We know the company well. Interesting product. Again, to Rafael's point, the biggest strain for us was just the international presence. They virtually no, very small presence in the U.S.
A lot of their value is based on a product that they're introducing in China.
Right.
And I personally don't have a lot of belief that product is a game changer, and a lot of their value was attributed to that.
I'll add one quick or couple of parentheticals. One, it's a business that has grown what looks like for growth's sake rather than any particular strategic logic. And the other thing I'd say is that, interesting enough, one of our former colleagues at Green Tech joined the firm as the IR director, and then as soon as joined, left for another company, and left for a kind of bigger and better company. And I think just anecdotally, that just my sense from that is, it's not necessarily therefore not an attractive company for you, but as a growth platform, it's one that if you looked at maybe to the Thales team's comments, it's one that you'd want to get for absolutely pennies on the dollar as opposed to a strategic platform.
And the SG&A, it's very top heavy, so there's a lot of cleanup work that would have to be done.
Great. thank you. I saw it in a presentation somewhere, and I just wanted to ask.
Sure. Thanks for asking. And feel free. I mean, there are hundreds of companies. Rafael and I have looked at thousands of companies, as we've just discussed not too long ago. And often some will come up, some will appear bigger, some will not be as relevant. So feel free to ask anytime. And sometimes, there may be something that we can include going forward. Many companies that might be applicable have a European operations and or a European base, and they have a U.S. subsidiary that could be worth acquiring. But in this screen, we went through over 30 companies pre-filtered, and we whittled it down as much as possible.
That's perfect. Thank you.
So the next page is we offer you our tear sheets, and these are just high-level tear sheets to go deeper on the companies that we identified that we thought were of the highest interest. And then we can add to these tear sheets. So if anybody on the Rotoplas team says, well, in the 12 names that you identified in water and wastewater treatment, we would like to look at these other companies, would you please add them? We'll be happy to do so. At this point, we thought these were probably the most interesting and relevant names based on the pre-established criteria, with the exception of Premier Tech Aqua, which I think is something that you would have to kind of just consider first, and then we can go deep as you like. The first one was Aranco. This is a Sutherland, Oregon-based company. I've known them for a number of years. Family-run business. Harold and Jeff Ball run the business. It's 350 employees. They've done a lot of work in on-site water reuse. Biohabitat, one of the leading engineering consulting firms that we call out in our report here, or this progress report, has used them. They have a lot of controllers as well. So sometimes people don't buy their tanks right off, but they will buy their control panels. So it's a great product offering, and I think that's one of the things that differentiates them, as well as their Advantex line. They participate in residential and commercial, so you've got really a sweet spot in terms of close to home to the market. Great market manufacturer reps and the channel. They're fairly strong, also with the Home Depots and the Lowe's as well. So what we highlight on this page are some of the reps and networks. So we do a rep mapping exercise, and the mapping exercise aligns all the companies that we follow and the companies in this process as well, and we figure out which reps they have. So you can see by the strength of the reps, where they're participating, and the other products the reps are offering, how good of a channel they have. And Aranco really ranks fairly high. This is a list of some of the rep networks that they use. The one drawback is manufacturing. They do have a large manufacturing facility. I know that's less attractive for you. The question is, how do you, when you get to the close to the finish line, do you end up selling it? What do you do with that? You've done that before, but that's just at a high level where they are. We need to find out if they're up for sale, if they're willing to be sold. Again, I have a call with Jeff Ball this week, so I'll give some more color on that. These are some of their product offerings. You can kind of see, it's definitely different from just a small-scale septic system. They go small as well as large. They work in residential housing communities. They work in hospitals, institutions, and some light industrial as well.
How certain are you of the size of Aranco? Because I thought they were more in the 40 million range.
So
it's not that important just to have a...
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And so a lot of this really is a function of two things. So it's a function of the sources that we pull from, and it's also a function of COVID. So sometimes the figures we have are 2019 numbers, and we found that some of these companies were looking to be down 20%. So we're trying to go off of D&B, Dun & Bradstreet. We sometimes use a Zoom info, but we also go by, in this particular case, employee count. The employee count was verified by the payroll protection program. So this is a U.S. program for COVID. We pull the database from that, and they list exact amount of employees at the company. And so we go by rule of thumb. That's approximately $200,000 per employee, U.S. dollars. So very rarely you'll see it at 150 or less. But again, everything is COVID related. There might be other parts of the business that are not included or that are included in the employee count that maybe increase that number. But that's an approximate number. Could it be 60? Yeah, I hope that helps. It's a long answer, but it's a process for us. And again, the manufacturing facility is pretty large. And so you might have a smaller business if you're just looking at the core business, and they manufacture other products for other industries as well. Natural systems utilities, this was a case where I actually thought it was a little bit bigger based on the employee count, but we know the company pretty well, and so in this particular case, because it's a contract services business, you may not have that same $200,000 to $250,000 per employee type of number. COVID has hurt the business a little bit. That's kind of unofficial. I mean, without going into any detail, but it's a $25 to $30 million business. They have a very unique offering in the marketplace. They built the business largely in a natural way, using natural habitats. They've gone and used more traditional methodology as well. So they buy product from Raphael's old company, Seaweed. So they buy the xenon membranes. They use traditional biological treatment as well as, to a lesser degree, chemical treatment. They'll use UV. They work in office buildings. They have municipal locations. Large part of this business is recurring revenues. They have some really great marquee locations, including Battery Park, New York, and Gillette Stadium. So this is really a very interesting name, and it's not officially on the market yet, but it probably will be within the next few months. The company has been approached by people from time to time, so I think you can easily get into this process before there is a process. The one thing I would make note of is they've made some acquisitions in the last year that's relatively small, but they have a pretty good pipeline of acquisitions, over $35 million in pipeline. So this could be something that you could tee up pretty easily. Some of the products is what we discussed: toilet flushing, cooling tower, makeup, landscape irrigation, laundry. They could easily buy and integrate Rotoplas products inside of their projects. So everything that you offer could be offered inside of their products in terms of their projects, and it would give you even additional exposure on the commercial side. And to what we discussed last time about the growth in on-site water reuse, this would be a great opportunity. Sorry, any questions before we go on to the next one? This is Norwalk Wastewater Equipment Company, also known as Norweco. They are similar to what you have in terms of product offerings, septics, but they have advanced water treatment at the residential and commercial level. They have a variety of treatment products that I think differentiate them from everybody else. Great distribution network, great manufacturing rep network. Company's been around since 1906. They split the business. The mold and precast concrete business was split with the wastewater company business. So they use others to manufacture the product. That's my understanding. Roughly 72 employees. And this is a family-run business. Greg Graves serves as the president and general manager of the company. He was previously president of the National On-Site Water Treatment Organization. So understands the business, and as it gets to one of your points earlier about shapers in the market, I think they are, probably in that line of being a shaper, a market shaper. They use local and national distributors, so BioSolutions, Marlin Wastewater Services, Home Depot, and many others. They go from small capacity of 1,500 gallons per day to 500,000 gallons per day. Additionally, they supply a range of chemicals, including disinfecting and dechlorination tablets, as well as solutions for nitrification and grease removal. So they do have that nice recurring stream of revenues that chemical companies provide. So I imagine that the mix that they have between chemicals and equipment probably gives them a higher margin profile than the traditional equipment company, based on our knowledge. These are some of the products. So you can see they, take their traditional polyethylene as well as concrete, precast concrete, and they use a lot of biological and mechanical solutions. Biomicrobics is smaller. They are well known. They distributed all around the world. They have a global presence. Most of their business, I believe, is in the U.S. I don't have an actual breakdown in the business, but I would say it's probably 70% U.S. The remainder is through Europe and the Middle East. They go from 150 gallons per day all the way up to 2 mgd. They're based in Lenexa, Kansas. Product is known, one of the key products is Septitech. Bob Rabori is the chairman and founder of the company, and his son serves as the president of Smith & Loveless. And he is also the chairman of Smith & Loveless, or at least was not too long ago. So there's a, I don't know how you work through if the companies are intermingled or not. I'm assuming there is a separation of the business, and to what degree I'm not positive. We'd have to find out a little bit more. But when you do your diligence calls with the engineering and consulting firms, they stand out as a leader in on-site water treatment technologies and solutions. They've been involved in a number of projects, so there's some great case studies. They're involved in residential, commercial, and marine. They hit all aspects of the business, and they seem to be, and they've been around since 1996. So they have a lot of installed sites, as we mentioned before, over 40,000 from what I understand. 80,000 installations worldwide, they claim. So these are the two subs they have, Septitech and Signco Faster. Those are the revenues, approximate revenues of the subs according to DNB. I don't know how much of the manufacturing is actually manufacturing versus what they call a campus, but they have a 120,000 square foot campus in Kansas. And the distribution is really through a couple major distributors. I don't know them yet, but they don't rely on a lot of manufacturing reps. So I haven't come across manufacturing reps that use them. You can see the products range in size. They'll do small-scale on-site water treatment systems, they'll do scalable water treatment systems, and then they'll do very large. Again, it's a combination from both biological and mechanical treatment. Before we move on to the next section, I just wanted to make sure we didn't have any questions on this portion, and then we'll move over just to the last piece of water treatment, which is desalination. Any questions? Okay. Rafael, did you want to take the desalination page? I can take the tear sheet on it, but if you wanted to go kick it off here.
Sure. So I mean, one of the most important things to know about desalination, which is really taking off all over the world, is that the U.S. is one of the worst markets for this in terms of size. There are still very limited, seawater desalination plants in the continental U.S. There's a big one in Florida, big one in Texas, big one in California, but it's nothing compared to so many other places in the world. And that I think it's a combination of wide availability of water and pretty serious regulations for any sized seawater plant in the continental U.S. I mean, to build an intake and brine disposal is generally not seen as worth it. There is a much bigger market for inland desalination, so taking brackish water, drilling a well, and purifying water there. Especially, California's got a big market for that. Other places do, but it's still also fairly limited from brine disposal. There's not good options. Municipalities, wastewater treatment plants can take some degree from very small ones, but if they get to any kind of size, they need to do their own injection well, which is you have to permit that, and it's not simple. Or they have to do a pipeline to the ocean, again, not simple. And so if these issues could be solved, there could be a big market for ag and for other areas, but there are currently not great solutions out there. there's a very thriving RO industry though. It's after China, it's probably the largest market, but lots of commercial and industrial ROs. But these are in facilities which are connected to treatment plants in general, and within a good chunk of manufacturing plants, a good chunk of institutional and commercial. They have reasons for this. So there are literally hundreds of suppliers. You have all of the big players have a business, and then you have different tiers of suppliers. You have a good chunk of maybe half a dozen companies that operate sort of in the 25 to 50 million range, and then you have hundreds of companies that are in the 3 to 20 million range who are supplying RO systems. But in almost all cases, they are essentially just selling the equipment. There's a very lack of market for these as a rental business. A lot of industrial customers are very concerned about not wanting to have equipment that's in their plant that's not owned by them. You have a lot of commercial plants are generally sort of on the smaller side. There hasn't been a takeoff of that. The one exception would be on the rental side. So there is a several $100 million market for trailers that will have a combination. They might have a UF or a multimedia filter as a pre-treatment, an RO trailer, and maybe a DI trailer following it with ion exchange for power plants and stuff. And so this is a very large, very lucrative market. So of course, Suez is the leader, and then Evoqua, and then you have a lot of the other big players, Veolia, Danaher through Paul, are all playing in this business. Mostly power plants, refineries, other industrial facilities. Again, not very much in commercial, residential. Those are really done as build and operates though, because when you do a rental, you're really going to pay for water by the gallon, or you'll pay for 3 months, and the company that supplies the equipment will own and operate that. And so Suez has over 700 trailers right now, which supply the combination of pre-treatment, RO, and DI. So you build up the big capital. You're able to have depots around the country, able to supply equipment pretty regularly. So when you put those together, these are not, other than that rental market, these are not great drivers. The one exception is the Caribbean, if you call that North America, where you do have many islands that are very water short. You have the ability for any resort community or resort hotel in many of these islands. The government are basically saying, you want to build that community, you want to build that hotel, fine. You build your own water system, which in most cases is going to be seawater desalination. So you've got 2 companies really which have dominated that, which are Consolidated Water and Seven Seas. And these are nice because they're sort of pure play companies. They really focus on desalination, build and operate in the Caribbean, and the majority of their revenue is build and operate and related services. And you can see both of them have been in demand. Seven Seas has traded hands a few times in the last few years, and Consolidated has been a public company for a while. It's gone up and down. It's actually sort of at a lower point than it's been. Both trade for about the same EBITDA. Both pretty sizable. And then when you look at who they compete against, and this is really they dominate the market, and then these other companies do compete against them at different times and have businesses. Obviously very small portions, but they're generally focused on the Caribbean. Selling the combination of commercial, institutional, some municipal, as well, desal systems. And there, build and operate is probably, at least half the market, maybe more, as it has become sort of a very standard approach, led by the tier 1 companies to adopt that in the market. They also, on a lower scale, but a lot of these companies will play with the wastewater as well. So they'll go to a hotel, do a build and operate on the wastewater, and then potentially do a water reuse system, especially on Barbados and the really water short islands. They'll put the desal system, a membrane bioreactor, take the reused water from the membrane, use it for the golf course, for the hotel. So packaging up both sides. Suez, when I was there, had maybe a $5 million a year business. This was the Xenon business. I'm sure it's bigger now. but so they might have. I don't know, it's hard to say what it is, but it could be a $20 million, $30 million a year business, so it could be somewhat sizable. Again, very, very Caribbean focused, just because not because people particularly want to be in the Caribbean. It's not a very attractive place if you're sitting in the U.S. because these are all independent nations, very small. Not a whole lot of work. Often wanting you to have a service guy on the island. Not such a great business model, but it was the only place you could really do it.
So, Rafael,
Anything to add?
Rafael.
Could I just say just one quick thing? So on Seven Seas, just in kind of to be clear, Green Tech worked with Morgan Stanley on that transaction, and to Rafael's comment, that just closed several months back. That would be a really easy introduction to make for you. Obviously they're not going to sell the business; they've just bought it. But it will be a very easy kind of like business development connection. I'm sure if you don't know the Seven Seas team, I'm sure they'd love to get to know you.
We know them well for a while.
Okay, good.
So and also we know that the team that acquired the business from we know the team from Morgan Stanley that acquired the company from Culligan.
Okay, well, it's a small world, isn't it? Thank you.
Yeah.
So that basically leaves you with one outstanding company, which is Consolidated Water, right, Rafael?
Yeah, the Seven Seas was, it was bought by Culligan just a few years before, and they sort of flipped it around, probably fairly soon. So it made no sense for Culligan to buy them anyway. So that was sort of a shock for everyone. So, but Consolidated, it's a public company, so at any time you put in a premium offer, I'm sure that board has to consider it.
No, and so you can see that the one thing I would add to Consolidated, because I've been looking at PERC for a little while, the same reasons here is that had clients that were looking at trying to understand water reuse, and it was one of the few companies that was out here in the water reuse side. And so Consolidated wanted to get in this market. PERC has done a lot of the design build work, some operating work, so some DDO, but mostly in the southwestern part of the United States. So it would give you a footprint, give you reference sites, but the issue is you're in some parts of the Caribbean you may or may not want to be. But that's something we're happy to evaluate and go deeper if you like. But we throw it up here just so that you have it as an option. And they currently operate 12 plants throughout the Caribbean. I think they also have, I think they're working on a plant in Mexico as well, if I'm not mistaken, a desal plant in Mexico. So if there are no more questions on the desal or wastewater treatment side, I can just point you to where we're going from here. Did you have any additional questions on the desal?
Mario, I think on these companies desalination, more than the Caribbean, our interest is in the U.S.
Right.
Yeah, but they say that what happened in Rafael explained the dynamics of the U.S. market for desal. So there's nothing there.
There are scattered opportunities here and there, but it's hard to sort of think of a thriving market anywhere. Even at the U.S. is a funny market in some ways. The idea of doing a build, own, operate, water by the gallon desal plant is something that's accepted in almost every country in the world other than the U.S. There's been extremely few of these, even at the municipal level, which is, very, very strange. Like usually the U.S. is more on the capitalistic side, but here it's, publicly owned, publicly managed assets are the norm.
I understand that those plants are done by the municipalities, right? The water operators.
Yeah, and I can speak, for California, it's shocking. Los Angeles built a small couple MGD one like 20 years ago. Santa Barbara built one, 30 years ago and never really operated it. The only really big one, which everyone knows about, is Carlsbad, which is a 50 MGD one. And they're supposed to build more of them, but they haven't. They might build one at Huntington Beach. But this is it. For a state the size of California, and you can sort of name the RO plants on one hand, is sort of shocking.
Yeah. I mean, there used to be a discussion whether you go water reuse or desal, and you could always use both. I mean, you can use multiple tools in the toolkit. But in California, you've shifted more toward water reuse, where LA is trying to go 100% reuse by 2030.
Oh yeah. LA will be they're building two 400 MGD reuse systems, so those will both be significantly larger than any other one in the world. So yeah, and Orange County has one of the biggest ones in the world, and there's lots of smaller reuse plants, scattered all over the state. And just for desal, I mean, part of it is like the coastline in California is sort of sacred, and so people just don't want to have these plants there. And then the inland desal, there's two brine lines that have been built, one into the Inland Empire in Los Angeles, and one into Ventura County, where they allow people to hook up desal plants and to just brine lines, which will carry the brine to the ocean, but they charge a lot of money for that, and there's still not that many plants. And then not easy to get permitted a deep well injection for the brine. It really is a problem in California.
I think this might have been the very reason that Consolidated Water decided to acquire PERC, just because they wanted to diversify their portfolio, and it gives them an opportunity to enter the water reuse market using similar treatment technologies when you think about it. Just that they don't have to worry about disposal of brine.
Okay, thanks.
So the last call we had a brief discussion with Charlie had highlighted it as well, and we wanted to at least get back to you on it, with some of the engineering consulting firms that are working around on-site water treatment. There aren't a lot of them. There are some very small ones, but finding the sweet spot for you, they're usually divisions of very large companies. For example, another one we had identified was acquired by Tetra Tech, which is one of the largest ENC firms, engineering consulting firms. So it really left a couple. We could probably dig a lot deeper if that's the path we'd want to pursue. But you have Biohabitats with approximately 12 million in revenues and 65 employees. They've done a lot of work in this space. They're based out of, they have two offices, two sides to the country, but the branch that spends most time on water is out of Oregon, but they're based out of the Northeast. I believe they're based out of Maine. And in any event, they do a great job. I'm not sure if they'd be open for sale or not. It's employee owned. The next one is Sherwood Design Engineers, smaller companies, also done some work around San Francisco, as an example, in on-site water treatment, 5 million in revenues and 13 employees. So there are a couple ways you can go about it. I mean, if you buy Biohabitats, you could certainly try growing the business and getting spec'd into projects. The one caveat is it may take you a while to get spec'd into projects, and so you have an ongoing business, whatever products they're currently working on. The other ones that do have an engineering practice that we mentioned were Natural Systems Utilities. They have an engineering practice. So that kind of gives you both engineering equipment as well, not so much equipment, but engineering and your design, build, and operate model. So that's it for the engineering consulting firms. We may populate with a couple more if they come up, but I didn't see any that were, either in all on-site water treatment or ones that were small. Most of them were very large firms. So the next steps are consistent with our outline on page 3. We'll continue to provide targets, but our next step is on water purification segment, point of use and point of entry. We've been currently populating the funnel with potential targets, and we'll begin a filtering process this week. So Rafael has been working with me on this. He's already come up with over 30 names at the very minimum. And so we're just kind of filtering through to find the right size for you. And so then we'll have an update in 2 weeks on that. And then we'll transition from there to the irrigation, to other equipment, to building equipment, plumbing equipment, et cetera, that are adjacent to your core market. And then we'll cover irrigation, and with that, we'll also have the digital platform. So that's how we're rolling this process through, but we continue to build a funnel as we go along. Are there any questions? Comments?
No, I think
Mario, do we hit on all the points? I think we try to make sure that where we're heading is clear for everybody.
yeah, I think we're starting to get some traction now, David. And thanks
Okay.
for taking the input and feedback from last week.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
One question, please.
Sure.
Next meeting is the 28th. I cannot be the 28th available, but I can be the 29th. If that works for all. If not, please go ahead the 28th, and